Welcome to F9 Nautilus, an incredibly inspiring collection of deeply organic and emotional playable instruments for Ableton, Logic or Kontakt. Logic and Ableton users also get access to 11 DAW sessions where we show you exactly how we made all of the audio demos that you can hear on the product page. We've also included over 400 MIDI files, not only all of the parts from the demos, but over 125 bonus MIDI files that I put in there personally to help show you around this incredible collection. Let's dive straight in.
Today we're starting off in Logic in the Tangiers session. That's a perfect example of what Nautilus is about, this warmth, this movement, and this kind of emotive feeling. Now let's have a look at the sounds that I'm using here and how I'm using them. The main sound is called Tundra Pluck. It's one of the pluck sounds in the pack. And one of the first things I want to impress on you is how well a lot of these sounds will actually layer. Underneath it, I've got a much warmer keyboard sound, much duller, called Big Blue. And actually, as you can see there, this one's got an extra note. It's just got a bit of a harmony on them. But you put these two parts together, and what I'm showing you there is one of the most fundamental things that we wanted this pack to do, and that is to be able for you to build a soundscape from layering these things together. Now, one important part, if you have a look at the quantize on this region, you'll see it's off. It's actually quantized on the Big Blue part. So in other words, I've got a quantized part playing against an unquantized part. And this, if you want your parts to have life, can be quite magical. Now, as you can see, this one note is actually quite significantly off-grid, whilst the parts of Big Blue are nice and tight on there. So with this trick, we get the best of both worlds. A nice tight part, but some life around it. We also wanted to make sure there was a lot of differences in the sonics between the patches. Have a listen to this little part from the Shale-in Pluck. It's just an extra movement device for this part at the end of the bar. In the next section, the melody is played by different instruments. Again, two sounds layered up. We've got the Amazon Pluck and the Florida Keys. And as you can hear, again, these sounds are gelling together perfectly. I know a lot of you struggle with arrangement. Well, how about this? It's a really simple trick. Take one of your lead lines and just play the same notes with a different set of instruments. That's why we've done a lot of this within these actual projects to show you how well it can work. They don't have to be massively different, although sometimes an enormous contrast is a great idea on a melody, but it keeps the interest going. It's engaging. I'm using pads to cross the bar lines. On many of them, I've got slow attacks so they build up over the bar change. Not everything has to happen in nice, even blocks, and bringing stuff to transitions between bar sections can really add some emotive power. Let me play you a lot of those instruments in solo. And here's a sound I absolutely dig in this collection. This is the Potted Pluck. So it's a bit like a hang drum, as you can hear, or a hand drum, one of those tuned percussion things. But do you notice something? A lot of sounds like this, normally you have to do a ton of work to make them fit. Well, this is just using the standard Logic plug-in chain and our GUI controls at the bottom.
Here's a problem I've had over the years, and see if it rings a bell with you. I've worked out over many years of production that my brain has two sides. One side, probably the right side, is creative. It's where all the magic happens musically. While the other side is technical. And this is where I can interface with computers, with hardware, with GUIs and all of that kind of stuff. Now, the problem is I'm only ever in one mode at a time, never both. So why is this an issue? Well, when I'm working, I just want the inspiration to flow out. But so many times I'm dealing with completely lifeless sounds that are going to need a ton of processing, and that pulls me away from that creative side into the technical. And suddenly I'm dealing with multiple GUIs, different routing options, modulation matrices, all of the different nuances between the different synths and plugins. And I'm almost fighting with the technicalities of it simply to get something that allows me to emote. Now, would it help if I had a whole collection of sounds that had all of that kind of emotiveness and movement and organic feeling built into them? Would that help my flow state? Would that help me make better music? Well, the answer to that, from my experience after putting the 11 demos together for this project, is yes. And that's exactly what Nautilus is, and I'm so proud of it. Now, the reason there are 11 demos for this particular pack is that I got carried away playing it, and that's always a good sign when you've made something and you just literally can't put it down.
Let's quickly go through the smart controls. We have a modulator plugin that is generating using a random LFO, a very faint trace of random pitch bend. Now, the output level is non-zero there. It's 11%, and that is controlled by this instability smart control at the bottom. So you can add a lot of it, and it really will start to get a bit bendy. You've got a fine tune here. As we're using a lot of modulation and other tuning effects built into the patches, sometimes you may just want to nick things sharp or flat, so those controls are easily available there. We have some amp controls here. We have a general compression control. This one will control the mix of a stereo ping pong delay. And here we're using Chromaverb. We've got two controls here, the level of the reverb and the decay time of the reverb. Two controls that I'm always reaching for in this: low cut frequency and high cut frequency. I cannot tell you how much great work you can do when you're balancing just by using these controls. We've got an overdrive control here and a straightforward output control for the whole patch. As many of you may know, I'm absolutely passionate about keeping the channel faders at zero or as close to zero as often as possible. That is because this is the most useful part of the fader, where you can actually make quite big movements and only really be making quite small adjustments. Whereas down at the bottom of the fader, even just a few pixels means that the values are jumping quite dramatically. So that's why it's great to have this output control here, so I can keep those faders centered most of the time. So now let's just talk about the bass. We've got a really dark, distorted and filtered bass sound here. So as you can hear, that's really punching down on the root notes of the chords. It's a little bit, I suppose, in the way the Medusa has often done this in their productions. And then we've got a sub bass with the Decade sub. As you can see, I've got legato playing here where some of the notes are overlapping. And that means a lot of the patches are actually going to use legato and glide. So in other words, you don't get the re-trigger at the front of the sound and they will glide upwards. So the smart controls are slightly different. Here you have the ability to change the glide time, so you can either have really fast and snappy movements between the notes or very slow. As so many of you have asked for it, you can also on these smart controls change the range of the pitch bend, even taking it all the way to an octave. And we've really concentrated on deep, dark and thumping bass sounds for this so that they complement all of the richness of the keys. One technique I'm hearing a lot at the moment are single notes, normally in the root of the key and high up. And here we're using that technique using the Amazon PLucks. There's another one a bit later on coming up underneath it using the patch Galaxy Pluck. And on this one you can see I've used quite a lot of overdrive, but listen to it within the track. And if you look through the automation on the entire project, you'll see there's a lot going on. So instead of it being a static note that would become annoying, the top frequencies are starting to open up as it progresses and then either cut back down suddenly or open up and then come back down gently, as you can see in this second section. This is a great thing to get your head around if you're just starting out in music. They don't have to be loud. They're in the background, and you're hearing a lot of this on organic and tribal house and Afro house at the moment, and many of our pluck patches will work perfectly for this. And whilst we're on the subject of using a single note to add some tension, have a listen to these. So what we're looking at here are two patches in this collection, grunge layers and texture layers. The grunge layers contain sounds like this. And these range from everything from vinyl sounds to fire, weird grungy sounds. And I can just hold a note down on the keyboard and then play filter sweeps in with the mod wheel. When I place the mod wheel all the way up, the filter is down and I can hold and then bring it up. And then I can actually bring the mod wheel up, effectively creating a performance that will allow me to build dynamics in. That's the textures. The grunge layers are single notes. And again, allow me to perform what I want the sound to do in with the modulation wheel. As you've seen with the smart controls, you can select them here. And don't forget, even though I'm showing you around this first session in Logic, these functionalities are also available inside of Ableton and Kontakt. And when you add some of all of these techniques together, what you can get out of it in terms of transition can be astonishingly good. Ah, the felted grand. Once again, you can see I recorded these parts in with the quantize turned off. They're playing against some very well-defined and quantized beats, so that looseness just gives them a wonderful feel. We're starting to hear these kind of grand piano sounds pop up all over different styles of music, and it's just one of the pianos inside this pack.
Making your music stand out against everything else is now more important than ever before. And one of the quick ways you can do that is not using the same major or minor scales that everybody else is doing. Many of you will have heard of the Phrygian scale, which is a very slightly altered minor scale. But have you heard of the Phrygian dominant? Now, we've used this very successfully in 2 of the projects.
This project is Constantine running in Ableton. So as you can hear, this scale has this wonderful mixture between musical richness and power. And what's really interesting, let me show you the bass part. Even though we've got all of that melody, it is generally hanging around the root. In other words, the 808s are firing off on the D. This track is in D Phrygian, and as you can see, the main note throughout the whole bass line is just D. So that'll show you the amount of musical movement you've got with this scale, even though you're just holding the bass end down just to one position. And just quickly on the basses, I'm using 2 bass sounds. At the beginning, I'm using a patch called Boulder 808. can see these overlapping legato notes there. As you can see, it's in legato mode, so you get that pitch bend between the notes that overlap. Also, this is responding well to quite fast notes like 30 seconds here, a nice little effect. So that I can control the exact lengths of the bass notes, instead of letting the 808 decay on forever like normal, I've actually pulled the amp release all the way down. Now, when the beats start, I'm actually using a patch that's called Impact Double Bass. This is a hybrid patch. It uses real acoustic recordings of a double bass and then adds a synth tail. And it's a type of patch we're experimenting with at the moment. In its raw form, you really hear the attack. Here, I've doled it right down and distorted it slightly to fit this production. As you can hear, these bass patches within Nautilus are working really well with modern beat-orientated productions. And of course, I'm using our grunge and texture layers here to add some interest. And I forgot about this, there's a nice texture hit here. So I've used the texture rack and just opened the amp release all the way up. High pass, filtered it a bit, dug into a little bit to some EQ, and then fired it into our rack that appears on all of the main key, pluck, piano, etc. patches. Vintage lush effect. Here you have controls over a ping pong stereo delay, that's the orange section at the top, and a lovely sort of vintage hardware styled reverb. I'm also using some textures for transition. And once again, I've simply played that modulation in using a standard modulation wheel. With this project, I really wanted to show you how the plucks and keys can work together. So we've got this riff that repeats throughout. And hear how this Phrygian dominant scale is amazing at building riffs from. This does run pretty much throughout the whole thing, but it's played on different instruments. So we come here from that amethyst pluck to the harpsichord pluck. And one quick little aside here, you'll see if I turn the automation on that I've ridden up the level of the reverb here. Now, this is not a dry-wet control. This is set up as a parallel effect, so the dry signal never disappears, and it's ramping right up and then snapping straight back down on Ableton's automation. Now, if you're unsure about how to get those kind of snapback effects, let me show you quickly. I'm just going to put any old automation thing in here, and I'm going to come up and grab the pencil icon, and then you can snap it back down at any position like that. There is one little production trick here. I've taken our riff, and just on this last half bar, it's been dropped to an octave. It's something so simple, but it really works across a bar transition. Going to bring a few elements together here because I just want to show you how the sharpness of some of these pluck and lead sounds are working against more lush sounds. So I've jumped into using a fantastic patch, Butter Upright. And I'm using a lot of our vintage reverb emulation here. What's important to play with is this chorus amount. This is built into the standard reverb that's inside of Ableton, but it really does sound vintage. And a lot of the early reverbs use chorusing and modulation effects to kind of increase the perceived quality of their tails because they could be quite grainy. This is replicated inside of Ableton, and for sounds like this, it's just wonderful. But against all of this, I've also got some much softer sounds. And hopefully with this little voxel pad sound that's playing a little melody line there, you can hear how often this scale has been used in hip hop. one more pluck playing a solo line down here. And it's almost trance-like with that huge, great big reverb on it. Now, this sound is used earlier on to create a lead line with this stucco pluck as well. And as I'm sure you can see here, I've played this in with the quantize off. Now, if you're not a player, don't worry about having to play these kind of things in. You can always move things around on grid. But I think I'm right in saying that, yeah, I've heavily quantized one of these. So yet again, we're looking at this process of two leads stacked together, one highly quantized, one not quantized. And I've also added these little flick notes just into it here. And those subtle differences, even in the velocity there, will actually help lead lines cut through. We like change, and this is what this pack is all about. I've got three patches here. I've got Jupiter keys, Lucid pluck, and Decca keys. So what I'm doing here is doubling the actual riff that's played on this top part, which is the Lucid pluck. I'm doubling that with a lower octave, and it's a synth sound that's coming off an old Jupiter 8. And it's in a different octave. I'm also adding some harmony notes here. Well, when I say harmony, they're just an octave up, so it thickens up a bit later on, and the Decca keys is a nice little pretty sequence underneath. And once again, you start to add all of that together, you get this atmosphere. So musically, it's not actually changing a great deal. There's a couple of different melody lines playing, but it's all still hanging around that D, and yet you get this difference just by simply voicing things in a different position. What I find unique about this scale is even though it has a moody and minor feeling, the first chord is actually major, so that on a downbeat you can hit it quickly and then step back to the atmosphere. It's quite a unique thing. Now, obviously, with this release, all of the MIDI files are available, so you can easily dig in if you grab it. Also, if you use Ableton and Logic, you can look into the sessions to see what I'm using. But we wanted to go one stage further, and we've got a brand new tool, totally free on the F9 website. It's called the F9 Scale Finder. I will leave a link to it in the description. So basically, all you have to do is put in the key that you are working in and the scale you want to use. It will then give you the notes that you can use in your productions to fit that scale, and also give you some information underneath about the sound of the scale and some examples of where you often hear it used. I cannot encourage you all to experiment with different scales enough. A perfect example in modern club music was when Steve Angelo released Darkness in Me. That uses the Phrygian dominant, and it's one of the reasons why it stood out above this kind of sea of other tracks, and why producers who use those altered scales can see really interesting success. The F9 Scale Finder works not only on desktop machines but on phones too, perfectly. So please come and visit it. It's totally free, and you might be amazed at the melodies you create by using some of these altered scales. Just some notes on Ableton. In standard mode, this installs into the pack section. Your racks and all of your instruments are available here in the Nautilus racks. And as this is a pack, it has previews. On the demos, we're actually using audio stems for the beats, but we've also converted everything into drum kit. These are available in Logic and Kontakt too, and they can simply be loaded up. And this is where the MIDI files come into play, because not only are all of the demo MIDI parts available in here, but there's drum kit MIDI for each one. Here are all the demo projects, obviously, to load in. Let's have a quick look at the instrument racks. The reason why we've moved over to Live 11.1 as standard now is so that we can get access to all 16 of the macros. From the left, we're using the stereo spread function that's built in to the samplers and simplers. This basically is like a simple unison circuit that basically fattens the patch up. It's ever such a useful control on things like this. We've got the ADSR for the amplifier at the top here. And then we've got some standard filter controls here, filter frequency, filter res, and then the envelope amount. We've then added the filter ADSR next to it. Now, the velocity sensitivity slider will actually control not only the velocity sensitivity of the filter, but the amplifier too. So it's a kind of all-in-one control. There's an overdrive function within the sampler as well that's great for adding a little bit of grit. And here, ever so usefully, we've got a stereo width control, which you can see is affecting this utility here, and an output control. Now, I'm really keen to impress on all of you that if you keep everything at 100% wet, you're basically making two distinct mono mixes. Try on as many sounds as possible, experimenting with the width controls. Even on a few of them, just pushing them past 100%. That's why we allow it to go just over there. But mainly, concentrate on bringing a few things in and then using standard pan controls. This is how you can get a much wider stereo field than just having everything set to 100% width. I know it sounds unintuitive, but stereo is about difference. If you don't believe me, just try it. Obviously, we've got our vintage lush effects here, but also in this little rack, there is a compressor and an EQ. The compressor's almost hidden, but you've got the threshold, dry wet controls and everything here. And this was so that we could kind of balance all of the patches as we wanted to whilst we were putting them together, but ever so handy to have all of this built in. Obviously, if you are a suite user, you don't have to be restricted just to the basic simpler controls. You can right-click and then change this from simpler to sampler, and then you have access to all of the advanced functions within there. This is one of the demos called Mora inside of Logic, and we're going to use it here to show off some of the pads inside of this collection. So as you can hear, this library is not just straight out of the box pad sounds. As always with our Logic releases, these now load in using the Logic library. These are all Logic patches and come with a full plug-in chain as well as the smart controls you saw earlier. In total, this collection covers over 180 different patches. We've tried to cover as much sonic territory as possible. And one really important point, we've gone to the ends of the earth to make sure that this collection works in any genre of electronic music. here's a playthrough on Ableton of some of the piano patches. This is only a tiny section of the library, but it will just give you an idea of some of the different flavors that are contained within. There are more extensive playthroughs on the product webpage.
That's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you get as much enjoyment out of Nautilus as we did making it. As always, please keep an eye on our webpage. We've got some really exciting information coming up soon, particularly if you're a Serum 2 user. I wish you all the best from my family to yours in these increasingly uncertain times. And remember, it never rains forever.